afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the so-called RMP VPT. My name is Dan Duzy. I'm the Manager Air Operations Implementation Section, and I'll be moderating the session for the next 90 minutes. Obviously, we are excited to share with you this topic, very relevant, of course, for the upcoming summer months, where we will likely see more visual approaches, more circle-to-land approaches, and the likes. So the webinar specifically is there to explore the development and use of procedures for visual maneuvering with prescribed track relying on required navigation performance. A lot of words, but in short, we're going to talk about RMP VPT. What you can expect for today is that we will try to convince you to transition from the old RNF RMP visuals to the new RMP VPT. And we will start with explaining the ICAO concept that is based on the ICAO Circular 359/2023, which has been transposed into an EASA Safety Information Bulletin, which I understand has been published yesterday. So we will give you a link later on during the presentations to look at the SIP. And we aim to show you how the RMP VPT provides for safety enhancements, mainly driven by a higher degree of design and procedural standardization, as well as more robust definitions of obstacle clearances. So that enhances safety. Throughout the session, we have the so-called Slido app or the Slido running in the background. So obviously your engagement will help make the webinar very interesting for all of us, I would say. Just for, you might have a question about the presentations, they will be uploaded after the session to the EASA events page. So if we go to the next slide, first and foremost, again, remember saying the Slido here, you have the QR code. You can either hover on that with the phone, or you can actually go to slido.com #VPT, and then in that case, you have to use the passcode. If you use the QR code, there is no passcode, so that's easier, I would say. So with the panelists today, we have an extremely experienced set of experts with us that have been heavily involved in the ICAO discussions, as well as the development of the EASA SIB that comes then on the back of that. And I already appreciate the fact that they made time for this session in their busy schedules that they all have. So before we begin, we go through the agenda. Introduction is right now, of course. We will then see a presentation from my colleague Francisca Arenas on the background of the concept introduced with the Safety Information Bulletin. As said, this was published yesterday, and I think at the end of your presentation there is a link to this SIB. And Francisca Arenas is our senior air operations expert at EASA. Then we have a presentation from on the safety case of the RMP VPT, and this will be delivered by Alexander Gerritsen, who is from EasyJet Europe. He's a chief pilot and nominated person flight operations. This will then be followed by a joint presentation between Lufthansa and Austrian Airlines on the development and application of the operator's proprietary procedures, in short OPP. So Pascal Bay is from Lufthansa. He's the manager of sustainability development and analytics. He's also a PBN expert and part of the navigation team, as well as the captain on the Airbus 330 Lufthansa. Alexander Fritz is at Austrian Airlines. He's the head of flight ops policies, efficiency, engineering, and digital solutions. That presentation is then followed by a presentation on a published RMP VPT procedure, in contrast to the operator developed procedure. And this will be presented by Julio Mendes from Iberia, who is a line check and standards captain on the Airbus 330-350. And then towards the end, we have Airbus presenting the topic on what Airbus is doing to facilitate this particular concept on their aircraft. And this will be Julien Bernage. He's the Senior Flight Operations Engineer, Approach and Landing Specialist, Flight Operations, Support and Training Standards at Airbus, and he will be supported by his colleague Patrice Rouquet. And as I said, at the end of the session, we have the question and answer through the Slido, and these questions can be put forward at any time. And of course, at the end, we'll have about 20 to 30 minutes to ask the question. So that's a lot of things to have been said at the beginning in the introduction. So I think I'll hand the word now to my colleague Francisco, who will go into the first presentation on the background and the SOP.
Thank you very much, Dan. Again, another further reminder on the Slido, please connect. And because I see in the chat some people making questions there, you should do the questions, the technical question, of course. I am referring to the SIV and the presentations. We would like you to do it on a Slido. So join a Slido, you have the QR code there and the password there. So start making your questions now. You can start now because we will ranking them and then answer live after all the presentations. We aim to be roughly 45 minutes from now on presentations and then move on to another 40 minutes on questions and answers. So let me start. So first of all, we just published this IB yesterday. It was done on purpose, you know, for the presentation of today. A little bit of background of when we started to work on this project. It was back in ICAO. The job card was approved back in 2014. So we started on the flight ops panel number 1, and it lasts from 2014. We started with the actions in 2016, and then finally we finished all the actions in the flight ops panel in 2021. And we published the circular in 2023. The idea was to standardize the RNAV visual development. At that time, when we were talking in 2014, RNAV visual was the kind of the new thing that happened. And we started with this idea, and then through the development of the discussions and the documentation, then finally we ICAO ended up in the RNMP VPT as an IFR procedure with a visual fix that leads to a visual segment, a visual with prescribed track, and that end up with all the discussions about RNAV visual, RNMP visuals, and all those kind of approaches that are not standardized. So in the circular, there are two concepts. In the ICAO circular, there are two concepts that we try to transpose those concepts in the EASA SID. The first one is the operator property procedure, and it discussed the overlay of a VPT developed by the operator, following as I say, an overlay, not an RNMP substitution, but an overlay, meaning that you still need to acquire the RAD-NAVs and the navigation equipment on the ground, or if when you do an overlay on the GNSS, then the GPS primary, etc. But the idea is an overlay, not a substitution, okay? Where the operator, and we will have further explanation from Lufthansa Group and Austrian on how to develop these operator property procedures. These operator property procedures are, let's say, data protected by the operator, so it's not visible to the public, but okay. So then the next one is the state published procedure. We will have a presentation from Julio from Iberia discussing the implementation of a state published procedure in Costa Rica. This is a standard chart published by the state, and then we will have further information about it, but it's an official published procedure. Some details about the state published procedure. The RNMP, again, is a VPT is an instrument flight procedure, it's an instrument approach, but with a visual point, a visual fix. Let's say that from then on, you move into the visual segment. And the visual segment, although you are visual, it may be subject to restrictions, so you will need to read the notes of the chart. In a state published procedure, of course, the ATC clearance and the standard phraseology applies, and there's a clear indication from the controller to clear you to the RNMP VPT Victor, I don't know, whatever, to runway 25. Misapproach and go around, at least the misapproach should be published, and it may also publish the go around. Again, including and probably including the RNMP maximum deviation. So normally we are talking about an RNMP value of 1 in the misapproach and or the go around. Yeah, this is just to pay you attention that the symbology, the misapproach is, the line is clear, and then they go around. You have in the appendix 1 of the SIB, we explain what is the difference between misapproach and go around. Misapproach is in the IFR segment, go around in the visual segment, but you will have this information in the appendix 1. Operator property procedure, here, as I said, is not published. You have lateral and vertical guidance, although in the original approach, because normally you are doing an overlay, although in the original approach you may not have vertical guidance, in the operator property procedure, and this is a safety enhancement, you will have the vertical guidance. We will have more on the safety case with EasyJet in a moment. It reduced the risk of unstable approach. Again, this information is a presentation that we developed in ICAO. We're going to have now a presentation from Alex that hopefully it will confirm this reduced risk of unstable approach. It is used for circling approaches and visual paths, so an overlay of an instrument approach down to a visual path, especially when there's non-straight-in approaches. ATC clears the aircraft for the for the original approach, not the RNMP VPT, but the original approach, and that will be the standard phraseology. And the pilot used a procedure that is transparent to ATC, because, as we said, we recommend that you inform the airport, although it's not required. SIB, we just published the 2025-05. You have the link there. We're going to upload the presentation to you in the website, so you will be able to click. Nevertheless, if you go to SIB EASA 2025-05, you're probably going to find it in Google with this number, okay? And otherwise, you click on the link there, and you will have direct access to the EASA website where you can download the Safety Information Bulletin. The Safety Information Bulletin has several chapters. The first one is the applicability, which basically applies to everybody, including we have a manufacturer here, Airbus, and this includes also the design approval holders, which means the manufacturers. Okay, sorry for this term, but it's the legal term. Then we explain the reasons. You will see that we talk about the circular 359, etc. And then we go into the recommendations. The first recommendation is to all, and basically there we recommend everybody to move and change their procedures, or change their publications, or change the documentation from RNA visual, RNMP visual, etc., to or include the new RNMP VPT. In that part, we also explain the difference of the operator property property procedure between the operators RNMP IR. In that explanation of OPP, we explain the operator property procedure, and you will see the difference between an overlay to a conventional approach and the overlay to an RNMP IR approach. Then we continue with recommendations to the operators, meaning airlines, and here we distinguish a general part which is applicable to everybody, and then you need to choose. If you are an operator with RNMP IR approval, then you do a further step, the step 4, and then if you are an operator without RNMP IR procedure, you have 3 additional steps. Okay, so 3 in general, additional one if you are an RNMP IR procedure approval operator, and an additional 3 if you are not. Of course, the the additional the step for the RNNP IR procedure approval operator you don't follow because you are not approved. Okay. National Competent Authority, in which we provide some recommendations, and the ANSP and aerodrome operator. Pay attention to the ANSP because there's a small requirement for a safety assessment in accordance to Regulation 2017, the ATM regulation, and you have the 205 point in which we talk about the safety assessment, and we recommend you to do that as an ANSP. Finally, you have two appendices. Appendix 1 is basically to explain all the terms. And you will see clearly the difference between RNAP visual with the points of characteristics of this and the RNNP visual, and then finally the RNNP VPT. So you will have in one page and you will be able to see the difference. Also misapproach and go around. Appendix 2, you have a checklist which we recommend that you follow. 37 items. 37 items to make sure and verify that it's safe to operate that procedure. And there are 4 steps or 4 chapters, let's say, in the checklist. The flyability evaluation, the evaluation of the flight procedure itself, so the chart. If you have notes, if you don't have notes, you know how clear is the chart. Evaluation of the approach segment, so the difference, intermediate, final, etc. Go around, misapproach, etc. And then the evaluation of abnormal and emergency scenario, meaning contingency procedures, that we ask you to pay attention to this, including the contingency when you are out of the RNNP value, the contingency that you need to do. Of course, if you are in the visual segment, normally you are visual, okay? But it may be situations in where you are in the visual segment, you have an RNNP failure or an RNNP value exceedance, and maybe the recommendation of your operator might be to do a go around. Again, you are in the visual segment, and normal expectation is that you continue visual. That's all for us. So thank you very much, and we're gonna move on to the next presenter, which is Alex, if
Alex Gerritsen,
correct.
Yes.
So Alex, I stop sharing, and if you could please start sharing and initiate your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, hello. Very good morning. My name is Alex Gerritsen. I'm the Chief Pilot with EasyJet, nominated person for Flight EasyJet Europe. Thanks for allowing me to speak today and share with you a little bit on how EasyJet has had a success with the deployment of this type of approach. The one thing I'd like to focus on is the EASA SIB and where it talks about the benefits. Within the SIB, it challenges the pilot challenge for visual maneuvering is clear, particularly around adverse weather, complex terrain, or when the flight crew is not familiar with the aerodrome environment. And I would like to use a specific example that we've implemented in EasyJet, which is at Calvi Airport. Calvi Airport is on the northern tip of Corsica. It has approaches onto run 18 and then several approaches onto a visual approach onto runway 36. By the picture here, you can see the challenge that this poses for our crew. The topography is different, it's challenging, the coastal weather, and it requires visual maneuvering close to terrain. So the accuracy required laterally and vertically becomes incredibly important. Just to highlight this a little bit more, the visual approach for Calvi initially was to fly towards a quarry that you can see the point here, and then from there make a maneuver to the left, base turn, and then onto finals. The terrain, if not flown accurately, is clearly significant and challenging for our crews. What we were getting from this is a prediction on the aircraft GPWS alerts, the caution and the warning range, and just at that critical point before quarry, the aircraft systems wouldn't know that the aircraft don't know that the aircraft is turning. Hence, we were getting alerts at these points from the aircraft, which isn't clearly not desirable for our crews. So in terms of Calvi, Our safety management system showed we needed to take further action. Our safety performance wasn't where we wanted it to be. The challenges we could not control, that are simply part of the environment that we operated in, was the terrain profile, and that caused alerts, also early 1,000-foot and 500 call-outs. With EasyJet, they're based on radalt, and the terrain profile caused us issues as well. The puppies on finals are set in 3.5 degrees and offset. The wind effects are clear, and there's a limited time to meet the stability criteria. So the distance between for final approach was limited as well. And we were trying to balance the distance close to the terrain and having sufficient time to have a nice, stable final approach. We designate the airport as a Cat C airport, but for runway 36 as a visual approach only. The picture you see here is from my FDM data, showing an overlay of all the approaches that we were flying. And you can see quite a long spread or widespread of approaches. And what we found was the crew, in order to see the quarry, they would fly slightly left of the quarry as well. So they're slightly wider than we would planned or anticipated. The safety management system output were clear. We had terrain alerts, unstable approaches, go-arounds, and bulk landings. And bulk landings was sort of the final phases of the approach as well. So moving on to that, our system took action, and this is the solution we found. In this case, it's an RNAV visual would be converted into an RMP VPT, which is an approach onto runway 18, and then a coded visual segment all the way down. You can see here by the approach, we have a discontinued approach and a bulk landing, as Francisco earlier said, to consider all the what if cases in case the aircraft or the systems aren't optimum. So after implementing this, the performance went from, as you see on the left-hand side, this is what the visual approach performance was like. After implementing, what you see here is the after approach, and we can see all the approaches flying beautifully along the coded trajectory. We've added one of the red lines there. That is a visual approach, just to illustrate the difference between the two types of approaches. That is lateral, and I think a really important key here is that also in the vertical, what we saw on the vertical side is on the left-hand side, you see the performance. The gray lines indicate all the IL approaches originally. You can see it's aiming for a 3.5 degree trajectory. And then afterwards, we could see a much improved performance. So the trajectories were very much predictable for us, and we were getting much better performance. There's a slight spread on the vertical trajectory because of the way the approach is flown. Temperature does have an effect on the trajectory for this type of approach, which needs to be considered. The safety improvements, they were almost instant. They were consistent, and they delivered both safety, efficiency, and resilience to our operation. So this is the approach stability on runway 36 for Calvi. What we could see is the number of approaches on the blue bar increasing. The number of approaches in the red or the orange bar, apologies, increasing as well, but the percentage you can also see was not where we wanted it to be. Hence, we had to take action. We implemented this approach in the 2021, 2022, and you can see we've eliminated the problem entirely. So we've eliminated go-arounds, improving our safety performance as well, and we've eliminated the unstable approaches. What you see is in 2023, there was one unstable approach, and that was simply down to lateral on the final bit of the approach, and the crew had to go around, which is as expected for us. So our safety performance was massively improved by implementing this concept into our operation. That performance we see elsewhere in our network. So we're this type of approach and the type of approach offered by RMP VPT, using the automation to offer predictable, consistent lateral and vertical trajectories, using the automation of the aircraft and the technology available onto the aircraft, gives us these consistent results across our network. What we are taking is we're taking a safety-based approach to identify the areas where our pilots will benefit most, and that's where we focus our attention on. So for the pilots also, it's seen as a tool, as an assistance, rather than nuisance taking away from their flying skills. Looking at the next steps for EasyJet, the pilot skills remain important. So we want our pilots to be pilots and be able to fly the aircraft skillfully. So, and what we're trying to balance is using the technology available on the aircraft for our crews, challenging airports where the safety data is telling us these concepts will benefit, implementing those there. By doing that, we also manage their pilot skill and be able to fly and maneuver the aircraft accurately. Combined with that, we're very much into a competency-based training program, making sure that these concepts are embedded and that the crews understand the concept, they understand the automation and are able to deploy it efficiently. For our policies and procedures, this brings a challenge. We are seeing more and more types of approaches available to our crews. We're RMPAR qualified, or so for our approaches is to ensure that they're able to understand the concepts of the approach, the information provided by the aircraft, so that they're able to deploy it effectively. So in our manuals, that does bring a challenge which we're working on. In the background, our approaches, the approach validation, as Francisco talked about, are vital. So in our oversight, the FOSA type program that we need to have for RMP VPT approaches is also critical. So it's not just for the pilots, but it's also in the background, we're developing our procedures. That in mind is the technology. So the technology will develop. So we will keep on looking at this. We will keep on deploying latest technology to remain industry leading. But we will also look at making sure we deploy it effectively and where we support our pilots with this. So just from my point of view, using this data, using the information we've got at EasyJet, we see the RMP procedures are reducing complexity. It doesn't reduce pilot authority. It's a solution for us that helps us in terrain challenged or visual demanding airport environments. EasyJet's using a very data-driven approach to this. We're looking at how can we serve the pilots, how can we serve the humans in the flight deck, and we can see the operational benefits to the in our operation. I will stop sharing now. That is it for me. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll hand over back to Francisco.
Thank you, Alexander. So very interesting presentation, which kind of reminded me also of the days flying into Carcassonne, where also wind was an issue and a steep approach path on the other side of the runway. Clearly, the lateral and vertical improvements have been shown there. Consistency was also mentioned, and that the crews really see it as a tool to assist and not necessarily something that takes away their opportunity to practice their flying skills in that sense. So that's really good to see. So definite safety improvement in that sense. So for the next presentation, we will then look at how to the OPP, how the operators develop the procedures. And in the meantime, we have quite a few questions already in the Slido, but as I said, we will do that at the end of the presentations in the interest of time.
Okay.
So we have Pascal and Alexander, I think.
I need to present it from here. So give me 1 second. So hopefully it's coming. So Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francisco. It's for me proper visible. Can all of you understand me properly? Mic okay?
Yes, it's fine. Thanks.
Super, perfect. Before starting the presentation, I would really like to thank EASA because EASA started to draft the SIB that we are talking about, and it was really a big benefit that EASA took into account the safety opportunities that the operators proposed by using operator proprietary procedures and include the inputs into the safety information bulletin. As we did see, it's a real big increase in a safety level for operations, where pilots lack, especially in visual parts of procedures, proper guidance to a runway. So thanks a lot to EASA and also to IATA bringing it into a topic for these discussions. Next, please. Pascal and me, we will briefly show you what was the intention of the ICAO Circular 359 and the relevance of the EASA SIP to the operation. Thereafter, the procedure and the process that we have established within Lufthansa Group for the AOCs within Lufthansa Group that make use of operator proprietary procedures. So it's a defined process with proper establishment of procedures and a validation process that is defined with a checklist which is used to validate the procedures if they are behaving on the human-machine interface and on the flight guidance systems as we wanted them during the establishment of the procedure. And we also have dedicated route manual charts that are tailored and give the pilots a proper identification which of the waypoints and the coding that is used is from the operator side and which is of the public AIP side. Next, please. So the ICAO Circular 359 is properly and publicly available. What I wanted to highlight is the part 2 is what we are talking about, operator proprietary procedures. So the procedures developed by the operator for making use of RMP guidance to enhance visual maneuvering in parts where more or less no or small guidance is given by the NSP. So you can see on the right side of the part 2 of the circular, the chapter 2, describing the possibility to introduce flight tracks which are defined into a visual maneuvering area, so circling areas. So if we take ICAO PANSOP, so Doc 8168, Volume 1 and Volume 2, there's a procedure designed for circling, for example, which gives just a circling area, but no defined flight track. From the NSP side, this can be substituted by prescribed tracks. So that's the chapter 3. So we make use of an area which is already taken into account by an ANSP, and we give better guidance in these areas where the pilots follow a visual procedure by providing a flight track laterally and vertically. Next, please. So when there's a small picture of a small island in Greece, it's Samos, and you can see when you look into the direction of north and conventional procedure of an VOR approach, and it's more or less 90 degrees offset to the runway direction. And by providing a conventional procedure, there is, of course, a lack of guidance to the runway. And what we want to give is a guidance how to fly to the runway end. And therefore, we actually give for the instrument part of the procedure an overlay and an overlay to a desired flight track to the runway. And we provide a visual fix or a deviation point where it is clearly defined that the pilot has to be in VMC conditions to continue to follow the flight track using guidance to the runway. As there is no difference, and that was really a big part that the EASA took into account for the ANSP or air traffic control, which a flight path the airplane will follow to the runway, no matter if it's manually flown without any guidance, only on visual cues, or if there's proper guidance, there is no necessity to communicate with the aerodrome authority or the local NSP as the expected flight track is flown. And that facilitates it, of course, to increase the possibility of applications. So there is no new procedure design. We make an overlay to conventional procedures and giving a proper flight track to the landing runway. And Pascal will show you an example for this. Thanks. Next, please.
Hello to everybody. My name is Pascal B. I'm working as a captain of the 330, 340 within Lufthansa, and I'm also involved in the PBN team, where we design within Lufthansa called CFO procedures. Thank you also for the presentation before from EasyJet. So it showed exactly the same safety benefits we are looking with these procedures. Actually, we are flying about a bit more than 70 so-called CFOs within the Lufthansa group. I'd like to briefly introduce the procedure process within Lufthansa. As an AOC, as a hint to you, it's a bit small here, the presentation. You can zoom in. There is a function within the WebEx where you can zoom in a bit. So if a AOC decides to have a new so-called CFO, they order it and they send the order to our PBN team. And then you see on the right-hand side, we take a look into the airport and we analyze if we can do a CFO here. And then we use for the design the FPDAM from IDS or even ENAF to design that procedure. From the rules, we use AR rules, as you see the protection areas, and then we analyze the flight path with that AR rules for obstacles and terrain. So once this is done, we give it back to the AOC, they review it, and then we order the coding and also a chart from Lido. Once this is coming back, the AOC rechecks that charts and the coding, and after that, we pack the coding. Once this is done, this takes quite, I would say, about 2 or 3 months. Then we go into the simulator and we validate the procedure. So the pilots, they have checklists, what they have to do. We record that also with cameras, so we can take a look afterwards into the details. Once that is done and everything is okay, we release the procedure to the fleet, to the respective AOCs. Important is that you need a monitoring afterwards. So if something changed, like an angle of a puppy or so, and you have to do a redesign for that procedure, there we have a process to see if something is changed, and so that we can adapt the procedure. So next slide, please. Yeah, on that slide, you can see 2 of our CFOs. One is out of a localizer approach on the left-hand side. That's exactly the one we have seen before in the PANSOPS design on the right-hand side of the slide. You see the instrument part is a localizer approach. Then we have the divergence point, and we follow the described track, as you have seen in the EasyJet presentation. And on the right-hand side, another example out of a VOR DME approach, and then also with that turn off on the left-hand side, and then the track to the runway. Yeah, I can explain something because we have type 1 and type 2 CFOs. Type 1 means the instrument part is directly connected to the visual part, and on the type 2s you have a separate chart for the instrument part and then one part for this visual maneuvering. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's an example from a validation out of the simulator. So you can see the crew flies the procedure. They exactly write down which aircraft type, which FMS type, and so on. And also they fill out the validation results and they tick yes or no. If something is not going well, then we redesign the procedure, go again to the simulator until it's validated. Look into the future, we will adapt the checklist out of the SIB once it's out. Good. Yeah, I think next slide. And I hand over again to Fitzy.
Thank you, Pascal. What is also really important for all of the AOCs where we use operator proprietary procedures, it is of course necessary to implement the procedure itself into the operations manual. So we have a policy in the operations manual part A, how we deal with the operator proprietary procedures, which we internally call company FMS overlay, because it properly describes what the pilot has to expect. And we also, which is given in this note, rely, as in all visual parts of procedures, that the obstacle clearance requirement in the visual part still remains with the pilot. But as Pascal described, we take into account during the procedure design the obstacle situation of this procedure. And of course, what is really to be highlighted, each fleet has to develop proper standard operating procedures, which is just shown at the beginning on the right side. So depending on the airplane manufacturer, the avionic configuration, and the SOPs which are used to fly RMP operations, it is really important to make these developments before starting to fly OPPs. That's what we really recommend, and which was really fruitful when we implemented the operation. Next slide, and that's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and we will be there for any questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Muting myself. Thank you, Pascal, Alexander, for your also very good presentation there. My key takeaway is really the standardization of the approach and missed approach, and especially their distance from the obstacles. Understand RMP value 0.3 for the approach and 1.0 for the missed approach. And it's good to see that the whole system that you've put in place in the Lufthansa group today with this procedure. Okay. Good. Going to the next one, that is from Julio from Iberia, who then takes it from the published procedures. So this is in contrast to the OPP developed by the operator. Julio.
Good morning, everyone. I am 330-350 line check captain, Iberia captain. And first of all, thank you very much for the previous interesting presentations. Next slide, please. In the next few minutes, I think we're going to discuss our experience in Costa Rica, in San Jose. Costa Rica is a field with only an instrumental approach runway 07. And in the first time I flew there was 25 years ago. So I have the opportunity to witness firsthand how the visual approach runway 25 has been changed. So it's going to be a good example of the problem with the visual approach. Next slides, please. Okay, at the beginning, everybody knows what we had 25 years ago. The visual segments was a three-cone approach. In some airports, we had a prescribed track with three-cone approaches. Of course, this is still today. We have approaches, three-cone approaches, both of them. It's important to notice that in these kind of approaches, the primary navigation is by visual reference. Anyway, we find in some destinations that they introduce the waypoints. That waypoints in prescribed traffic approaches are only advisory, but of course, it helps us to the pilots a lot to follow the track more accuracy. Next slide, please. So we're going to do a little bit of history to understand the present, what it changed, and how Iberia update all the procedures. Next slides, please. As I told you before, 25 years ago, we had in the left-hand side charts, we have an approach to runway 07, and then we have only a third-clean, we can call a standard third-clean. In that days, we have a lot of examples with prescribed track third-clean in other fields, but Costa Rica had only the standard third-clean. As you can see in the chart, it was demanding with mountains around and high elevation, so it was not an easy approach. In the old days, we used to fly with Airbus 340. Next slides, please. Okay, when all the PBN procedure emerged, we find out in about 2008 that some countries using TERPs published a visual approach with waypoints, and in some points we had in our FCOM the AirNav visual approaches procedures. Today we have the same procedures in our FCOM. For Iberia, it was surprising that some ICAO countries start to publish AirNav visual approaches without regulations about that kind of approaches. So it was difficult for us to standardize all the procedures, because every country named the approach differently, but the only reference in our FCOM was the AirNav visual approach, so have to fix the different naming approach with the only procedure we had in FCOM. And next slide, please. Francisco, will you say next slide? Thank you. So Iberia have to update our procedures according with the new procedures, and we're going to see how we change the procedures. Next slides, please. Next slides. Okay, what we have in Iberia. Next slides. In our manuals, we have several points about the AirNav visual approach, or what we call, when we find a segment of approach that is based on visual, but we have waypoints, we use the same procedures. We have to, we need a navigation capability of nav accuracy high, and if the state in the chart say GPS is required, we need GPS primary, and the guidance mode, flight director is mandatory for Iberia, and autopilot recommended. If we have no problem with the autopilot, we have to use it until the final segment. The autopilot will be disconnect no later than 500 feet. This according with the third-clean limitations. We'll see now if we can establish another minimum, as it says the SIB. Next slide, please. In our part B, in our operational manual part B, we just copy what FCOM Airbus says right now. The same thing. Probably you have the same thing in all your FCOMs. So we didn't change anything about FCOM AirNav visual approach. Next slide, please. So the problem in Iberia, as you know, we fly all over the world, outside Europe. So as I told before, the big problem is we found a lot of names for almost the same thing. We have RNAP visuals, we have AirNav visual approaches. We have some countries that only name the approach as visual, but they use waypoints. We have some countries that have approach prescribed track using waypoints. So we have different name, and it was a little bit chaotic in the beginning. So we decided to put it all together and make a validation process. And then when we validate each approach, we make a list in our part C. The next slide, please. What is the approach validation we did till now? Probably is going to change now with the SIB, but prior to include it in our operation manual, we first validate the navigation database in the office. SMS do a risk analysis of the independent approach. We do some tests in the simulator with different weather scenarios and wind conditions. Then the flight operations department approve this approach. And for the moment, we do a pilot training in the simulator every time we have a new approach. Next slide, please. So let's focus now in Costa Rica, as I told before, because it's a good example of how in the last 25 years things change. Next slide, please. Okay, as I told before, 25 years ago, it was a standard three-current approach. In some point, the administration published an approach, a prescribed track visual approach, as you can see here in the chart. In that point, we had the points in our database, but the whole approach, it wasn't coded as an approach. So it helped us a lot because we didn't have to look forward terrain reference on ground. So it was really easy to follow the waypoints, but we didn't have vertical guidance. So it was an improve from the previous approach, but we had some problems because the airport is a high elevation with more than 3,000 feet. The mountains around the airport are really close to the airport. We have problem with the weather. In some point, issues with the PAPI runway 25. So after a few years operating this chart, Iberia decided not to do it. So in some point in 2012, from 2012, we only could approach runway 07. You can imagine with tailwinds, but we have to divert to alternate several times. Next slides, please. Okay, so probably 2 years ago, thank you, Costa Rica published a new approach. It was called only RNP Victor 25, only this, 2 years ago. And we find out it was a possibility to resume the operations in runway 25. So we did the whole process. And then like 1 year ago, we decided to operate again in runway 25. In some point, Costa Rica renamed the approach and now it's include the BPT. We already, when the name changed, we already were authorized to do it. But we can see that this is the first approach in our destinations that use the BPT name for the approach, because we had the authorization before. We are still doing right now. It's much easier. There is no unstable approach, less diversions. So it has been a great improvement. Next slide, please. Francisco, okay, thank you. So the advantage of the new approach, we standardize the procedure because we practice in the simulator. We have a great lateral and vertical accuracy. Of course, reduce the workload, and as a result of all this, the diversion to the alternate airport has been reduced. I think we only have one in the last year, and the stable approach has been improved too. Next slides, please. Conclusions. Next slides. So right now we are in a transition phase. We expect that all the administrations begins to publish RNP BPT approaches and change names of a lot of approaches, and we are going to evaluate the new approaches according with the SIV. And we are waiting for Airbus to publish the specific charter of RNP BPT. Iberia will continue applying the procedure RNAV visual approaches till Airbus publish the new procedure. Next. So thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to show our operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Julio and Iberia, for this another good presentation there. First and foremost, Costa Rica, clearly a challenging terrain, which Francisco, I think you've also flown there, so you know what they're talking about. So clearly, good that we're working towards collecting all these different naming conventions and putting it into the VPT basket in that sense. And that you've seen these improvements in vertical paths as well on your side. So that's really good to see. So we're going to the last presentation, which is from Airbus, from Julien, supported by Patrice, as I understand.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. So good afternoon. I'm Julien Bernage. I work in Flight Ops department as an engineer on approach and landing topics. Today in the room I'm with Captain Dirk de Winter, which is the expert pilot in Airbus Flight Ops department, and Jean-Michel No, who is also a flight operation engineer that will work on the introduction of the new SOPs regarding RNP VPT. And we have also Patrice Rouquet from the design office that is in line from Airbus design office. So we'll start with the current status and what has been highlighted by some of operators at presentation before is the AirNav visual context and the fact that we have a lot of publications since a lot of time. And the real issue with AirNav visual is that there is no real ICAO material, no airworthiness regulation, no specific recommendation, and what is more important, no harmonization for the procedure design. In that way, at Airbus level, it's difficult to provide a compliance status and also to provide operational guidelines, mainly on the way to operate and the guidance mode to be used in this particular operation. Nevertheless, we decided, I think it was in 2015, to introduce a chapter on AirNav visual to provide, I would say, more generic information than detailed SOPs. And of course, for all this AirNav visual procedure, that can be, we have seen that public or private, it's always conducted under the sole responsibility of the operator, and it's up to the operator to build, in fact, the SOPs based on our information and based also on the, I would say, the geometry of the procedure. We see recently the introduction of the ICAO circular 359 on RNP VPT, and we also contributed with Patrice that contributed on the creation of the circular in the ICAO working group. And what is really a good news is that now we have a scope that is really identified and a procedure design. As it has been introduced, it's an RNP AR-like procedure design. And ICAO, with this circular, provide a framework that can be very useful for us at Airbus to provide harmonized SOPs for this operation. And it also provides some information regarding the training and the specification of RNP VPT operations. In terms of compliances regarding Airbus aircraft, I will say more capability. Is the aircraft is capable or not to flying? Why? Because with RNP VPT, there will be no airworthiness regulation. So we cannot have a specific AFM statement of compliance for RNP VPT. But what we see is RNP VPT is an RNP AR-like trajectory with RFLA. So the systems and mainly the FMS should be able to decode and follow this trajectory. What we can say for sure is that the capability is ensured on A350 and A330 and A320 as soon as they are equipped with FMS Release 1A, Thales or Honeywell, and of course subsequent standard. And in terms of compliances, there is no RNP VPT, but we can find compliances regarding RNP1, regarding RNP approach, and the use of RF flag in the AFM. I would say for the moment, we focused our effort on S350, S320, and S330. And in a second time, we also will work on A220, S380, and even on S300. So what is planned in terms of documentation change on the future regarding the introduction of RNP VPT? First, on the flight manual, on the AFM, there will be no change. This is the same for the MMEL. We don't plan any change for the instrument part. It can be, for example, RNP1 requirement. So the operator will have to follow RNP1 minimum equipment required. In terms of FCOM, we plan to introduce some change. First, on the cross-reference table that indicate the guidance mode to be used depending on the approach type. So we'll introduce RNP VPT. Of course, we will work on standard operating procedure with a new SOP chapter. We will focus on specific RNP VPT operation with the use of the final app for final descent that will induce to have the manual deselection from the crew of the FLS guidance mode if the aircraft is equipped with both capability. Some specificities about the visual point, and also some specificities about the monitoring of the lateral excursion and the management of degraded navigation, even in the visual part. And we also will work on the task sharing to propose the task sharing in accordance with the SOPs. Regarding the FCTM, the flight crew technique manuals, there is no modification to plan because all existing techniques for approach using final APP guidance and what we indicate in the use of RF legs will be also applicable to RNP with visual prescribed track. So these procedures are under redaction. I don't have a draft available yet, but we are currently working on those modifications, and the target date for the introduction of all this modification is the end of the year, so October, November 2025, depending on aircraft type. And this is what we want to go in conclusion. This is really what we want to say, that we are really glad to have now a regulation in order to provide some help via producing SOPs for our customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian, and the Airbus team for this presentation. So clearly, no statement of compliance needed for this VPT capable aircraft. We note the Airbus 350, 330, and 320. No changes to the AFM, Master MEL, and and FCTM. Let's say, and the only change we can expect is the FCOM, as I understand, which you said would be November 2025. Okay, good. So thanks everyone thanks to the presenters for your presentations. I think this gave a good all-round perspective on what has been happening with VPT. The only perspective we've not seen, but we will get now through the Q&A, is from our colleague from the French Authority, who I should have introduced at the beginning, but I did not because he was not presenting. But Julian, you're with us. Julian Bernage is the senior flight ops. Sorry. Amaury. Oh yeah, sorry. Amaury Bargain, DGAC France, Lead Systems and Techniques, Aircraft Systems Unit, Expert Avionics, Panel 6 at the EASA. So welcome, Amaury, as well. I don't know if you want to say a few words about yourself before we go into the Q&A.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody. Thank you for your very interesting presentation so far. And thank you, my dear EASA colleague, for the invitation. So my name is Amaury Bargain. I belong to the French CAA, so the DGAC, DGAC. and I'm working within the Airworthiness and Air Operations Directorate, so the directorate in charge of the oversight of all French operators. And so I take this opportunity to drop on another topic so that has not been addressed so far within those presentations, is about the authorization of the operator to operate those kind of RNPVPT procedures, either public or private. So currently, the French CAA is on a way to define the level of operational regulation to apply in order to grant operators with an authorization to operate RNPVPT, especially state published procedures as developed in accordance with ICAO Circular Part 1. The freshly published EASA SIB 2025-05 provides operators and national authorities with some new guidance on the airworthiness regulatory basis to be considered in the frame of the global authorization process. And in the meantime, we have seen that through the previous presentations, that few states already published RNPVPT procedures, and some of our panelists, especially Iberia, are operating those procedures. I think I've seen different questions in the Slido regarding how to get an approval or what is needed for an approval. So maybe at this stage, would it be possible for some of our participants to share with the audience your recent experience regarding any specific requirements you had to show compliance to, either asked by your national authority or your authority in charge, or maybe by any other local authority, authority where the RNPVPT procedure are published. As because based on both the SIB and the circular, an authorization process has to be set, and the expectation of the process is to go through requirements that may address both safety assessments, aircraft eligibility, crew training, and operating procedures. So maybe by sharing those feedbacks, you may provide some answers to our audience about how to show compliance to the Airworthiness regulation so far, and what is administrative burden, I would say, that is needed or you can expect for the update of your global operating manuals. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Amore. So you already provided kind of a response to the first question on the screen, which I just shared, of course, for everyone to see. Before we go to the panelists with your question, Amore, maybe Francisco would like to complement with a few items.
Yeah. So this question is very interesting, and the question that Amore has put to the audience, to our panelists, is very interesting because it's the starting point of the SIB. Back in 2024, when we discussed this with the Arab step for people outside the EASA is every 6 months we meet with, it's like a Senate in which all the authorities of Europe in OPS, we meet twice a year to discuss for 3 days to discuss and standardize and provide a level playing field for the European operators. And we identify already in the Arab step that there was, let's say, some variance between authorities, and that's the intent of the SIB, that now we standardize. DGAC France, you guys established an authorization process in accordance to the circular, but then there was other countries that were more relaxed about it, and they didn't require any, let's say, any process to their operators. And in this sense, that's why we have established the SIB, and maybe after giving the floor to our panelists, to Lufthansa, Austrian Airlines, Alex in EasyJet, and Julio to tell us if you require, in the past they were requiring you any kind of authorization to operate those approaches, then I will go into what the SIB is saying about it. So I give the floor to the panelists to the question that Omery has.
Yeah. So anyone volunteer to start, make a response to Anne-Marie on this?
I'd be happy to start. EasyJet, we run Ireland. We've got 3 AUCs. So we're dealing with 3 competent authorities. Our management system is clearly is driving a lot of this and interactions with the regulators. So there's not going to be specific approvals. We are an RMPAR qualified operator, which helps because we can take a lot of the validation processes, etc., from that. But I think with us at the moment, a lot of this is in our manuals, getting those approved, and then within the background demonstrating governance, change management, and when we have specific approaches that we implement, that we share those with the competent authorities, so they have oversight of our inner workings. I think, as Francisco says, that is an approach we've got with our competent authorities. The SIB will formalise some of the requirements which we believe we already meet, but it's just making transitions in terms of terminology, etc., over time. That's but I think that's our approach so far.
Great, thank you, Alex. Any Julio, from your side, any points?
Yeah, almost the same, Alex. Before the reaching of the SIV, we have our internal validation procedure, and then when we publish in our C part, the national authority, of course, has to see it, but we don't have a specific evaluation list as we're going to have right now. So it's going to be an improvement, I think.
Okay, thank you, Julio. So no specific approvals there. And I saw that Alex would like to also make an intervention. Alex.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. What I would like to highlight is Austrian Airlines is also a long-time operator that has an authorization to operate RMPAR. So for us, it's 20 years now when we started. We have profound processes in the loop, but actually our ANSP, Austro Control, is also very supportive to make best use of equipment to increase safety. So we included it into the operations manual that we use these procedures in the visual part, so in the VMC part of the procedure. But of course, there is no ops spec for it, so there is no specific approval yet for RMP VPT. But I guess it's really important to include it into the operations manual of the AOC. So that's a very good progress and also in line with the SIP. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe, Dan, I will explain a little bit what we say in the SIV. I'm sorry, because I'm going to go in order of when it's appear in the SIV and not necessarily in a more logical order, but this is the order that we have in the SIV. First of all, operator property procedure versus operators that doesn't develop operators property procedures. We need to distinguish in the operators 2 types of processes. One process to develop an operator property procedure like Lufthansa and Austrian, that probably they have. I mean, they already stated that they have. And then another different process is to validate whatever approach RNMP VPT you're gonna fly. So the operators that only address the state RNMP VPT, they only have one process. The operators that, in addition, they develop their own operator property procedure, they have the validation plus the development of the operator property procedure. And this is what we say here. We say that the state of the operator should be satisfied, the operator process to develop such OPP, and then we say that they need to demonstrate this to the competent authority that they have capacity to oversee. So this is the idea of I develop operator property procedure. In addition, we say down here on the operator should, that they need to, let's say, validate the actual approach they're going to fly, either if it's OPP or either if it's a state published procedure. They need to validate, and then they have the checklist in Appendix 2 to be sure that they validate this. The authority, I go to the authority part here, is what we say, enable the use of RNMP by authorizing, okay? And here, there are different approaches because they should follow the CATO PMPA 110. Is either the authority approves a general process in which they can validate all the approaches, themselves, but the process of validation, I call it validation in the SID, is not called validation. But this flyability assurance, validation, whatever you call it, you can approve one generic, or the authority approve each and every VPT RNMP that they do. It will depend on the approach that they have. I don't know what is the future for DGAC France, if they're going to validate, authorize each individual one, or they're going to establish a generic process, but this is going to be up to each authority, because the SID, which is a safety information bulletin, is not regulation, gives you enough room to do either of the two oversight processes.
Okay. Yeah. Good, thank you, Francisco. So I think that clarifies more or less the first question. I think the second question is also related to the SRB, and I might have answered it already, but I'll just put it on screen. It's coming also back to the SRB regarding the applicability of the SRB to aircraft operators that are not going to produce OPPs, which recommendations actually apply.
Yeah, so here I stopped sharing, but basically for those that do not develop operator property procedures, you will need to go to operator general, which are 3 items, and then depending if you are an RNMP or you are not an RNMP IR approved operator, then you will follow an additional step, or if you are not an RNMP IR approved, then you will follow an additional 3 of them. But the part of the operator is catered for or meant for those that not develop operator property procedures. Of course, there are some items that you will see, well, this is too much, because we are thinking about the ones that develop their operator property procedure. But again, the idea is that the development of the operator property procedure is done in a different process than the validation, or call it whatever you like, of the approach, because this should address all the approaches that you're gonna fly. Back to you.
Okay, thanks, Francisco. I think that more or less answers for that question as well. Going to that next question then, is this the same as FMS guided visual from Honeywell? Can anyone answer this question? Anyone? Otherwise we park it and we go to the next one. No? Okay.
Yeah, because this is very specific for Honeywell.
Yeah.
We are not sure what is the question, the FMS guided visual from Honeywell. I mean,
must be a specific feature.
Yeah, it's a specific feature. That will be, nevertheless, in the checklist and in the, when in one of the 37 steps, you will need to make a decision, because there's a specific point about the guidance, that you offer and you're going to offer to your pilots. So, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Francisco. So I move on to the next one. So we have a lot of questions, and we have only 9 minutes left before the end of the session. So we'll try to go through as many as possible at this moment. So with systems that aim to aid the pilots doing visual maneuvers, such as circling, has the risk of pilots following the magenta, sort of, I would say, the flight directors in this case being taken into account as well?
Yeah, in the SIB, we already addressed these points, you know, and that's a little bit why we require validation of the flyability, because this validation that you need to do in the CMM is intending to make sure that if even the pilot follows the magenta, make sure that there's no any safety critical element. I don't know how they address, the operators address. I see Alex that wants to intervene,
Alex,
so that's perfect.
Would you comment on this?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of bits here. I think we're very clear in that you know, we have approach policies, automation policies within EasyJet that tries to find the balance between pilot skill and ability to fly the aircraft, and using technology effectively to drive safety, efficiency, and resilience in our operation. We do it two ways. So if we look at the Calvi case that I've used, you know, the success rate has massively improved there. So we use a system-based approach, database approach to look at where we can serve our pilots, but also in our new destination process, we also look to see if there's opportunities available because we understand our pilots, we understand also the types of approaches that create a significant challenge, and that's where we offer the support. So I understand the question, but I think the operational performance and the pilot skill is always going to be a balance. And with EasyJet, as I said, that data-driven approach helps us try and find that balance for our crews.
Yeah. So in the end, you've also tried to answer the second question that's below there about what is the risk to the degradation of pilot skill there? And I think also in your presentation you mentioned that you see it more as a support tool, with that does not necessarily infringe on the skill of the pilot per se.
Absolutely, yes. It's a combination between using technology, automation policy, approach policy, training. It's a real careful balance between all of those. But the concept where we're using it at the moment, the data-driven approach, helps us where we're serving the pilots. The pilot feedback on these approaches is very positive as well. So we have another signal to kind of go. The pilots are also seeing it as a support and benefit to them.
Yeah, one element on this, I remind you that there's an SIB of EASA regarding pilot manual flying skill, and then the FAA has issued a little bit more, is more aggressive, let's say, it's more vocal about the pilot manual flying skills, and this is an FAA, for those that are not European, FAA has published something about it.
Okay. If we had more time, I would have also asked the other operators in the room to comment maybe, but we do not have much time. So maybe we'll go to the next question for the NCC operator. I guess it's more for you.
Yeah.
From third country. So do NCC operators from third country need a specific approval or operational authorization to perform VPT procedures?
Yeah. What we have described in this presentation and in the SIB, I described this is applicable for European operators. So those that have third country operators, please go to your authority. The ICAO circular says that your authority should establish a validation and authorization process. It's up to them, but you don't need an authorization from EASA or from any European competent authority on this regard. You do what the operator, your country says. And of course, when you come, if you are an ICAO country, you can operate as per your procedures and as per your authorization or validation or whatever you have in your national country.
Thank you, Francisco. Marie, would you like to comment on this as well, or you have no comment on that?
Yeah, I just can add some things about it. We have currently in France one RNP VPT published in Bordeaux. And if you go through the AIP of this procedure, you will notice that we put a statement saying that foreign operators need to be authorized by their competent authority prior to operate those RNP VPT procedures. So it's valid for any foreign operator, including third country operators.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. Next, so a few minutes left. Going to the SAB specifically, the SAB indicates that the design organization shall be certified according to EU Regulation 373 regulation. To which procedures does this apply or not?
So I think he's talking about the flight procedure design people, let's say. The operator property procedure only requires a flight procedure designer when you overlay the RNMP-IR approach. So the normal approach is like it's been shown by Lufthansa, which is an ILS overlay and a DME, a VOR DME overlay. This does not require, but when you do an operator property procedure and you develop over an RNMP-IR approach, then we require you to talk to the flight procedure design because you are a non-RNMP operator developing an operator property procedure, which is a VPT overlaying the RNMP. And here we think that the operator itself and alone doesn't have the understanding and the capacity and the maturity to go into all the limitations and all the matters that happen at flight procedure design. Then when the authority is developing and publishing an state procedure, this is normal. Of course, depending on the member state, because the member state has sovereignty, but we expect that you develop following the regulation 3, so the regulation of the flight procedure design, and that it should be probably what your authority, I don't think any authority will take the risk to not discuss with flight procedure design and just publish. So I am expecting this also in the state published procedure.
Okay, thank you, Francisco. And then one last question maybe, which comes back to Alex Derksen from EasyJet. So I'm interested to hear what EasyJet does concerning training in case of FMS guidance that is lost. Are the crews allowed to continue visual? Do they still train the same visual procedure without guidance?
It's an excellent question. So I think, first of all, because we're an RMPAR qualified operator, the cases of FMC guidance being lost during the instrument part of the approach is clearly covered there. The crews allowed to continue visually, we don't prohibit it, but in terms of a visual approach, we also still carry or have a visual approach chart. It's a CAT-C airport, so the crews are trained in both the automated, when using the RMP on a visual in this case, and the pure visual approach. So I don't think we ever prohibit it, but it will really depend on the circumstances. So our pilots are training competencies, making sure that they understand where they are at the time of the approach. So if it's turning final, it clearly is. But if it's early on in the approach, they might just want to reverse and rebrief. So it depends on the briefing. It depends on where it happens to the approach, but we don't have a specific rule because ultimately it's still on the visual flight rules at the moment. When it gets to the RMP VPT concept, those are the things we need to have a look at to see whether we need to document and start prescribing policies. But at the moment, it is down to the pilots.
I can add something on Airbus side,
Okay,
because we are totally in these topics for designing future SOPs. What is our mindset at Airbus is that when you have, I would say something like nav accuracy downgraded messages or so on in the visual part, it means that the FMS or the navigation system is not more reliable. And so for us, it will be something like AP off, FDs off. And it's up to the crew to continue or not, depending on the briefing, on the operational approval, and so on.
Okay. Thank you, Julian and Alex, for your interventions there. I think that was very clear. Julio, last words.
We have only 30 seconds. Yes.
Okay.
In Iberia, we are going to study each approach, and we'll see the mountains around and the weather conditions typically there. And in some approach, we're going to allow the pilot own discretion, and in the other situations, we're going to request them to make a go around in the visual part. So it's going to depend in each approach. That's where we are planning for the future.
Okay, thank you, Julio, for that. I am assuming that now the rest is okay. So good. Thanks again for those interventions, Julio, also to you. So I'm afraid we're at the end of our session. So we have still quite a few questions there, but I think we addressed the major ones, let's say the ones that had most thumbs up. In the meantime, you can see that Francisco has shared his screen with the SIB and the link to the SIB. Also to note that all the presentations that you saw today will be uploaded to the EASA events page on our website. We do hope, as we set out today, that we have been able to convince you on the need to transition from the older RNAV and RP visuals to this new RMP VPT concept. I hope you better understand the background to this concept coming from the ICAO circular. And I hope we have also shown you that it does indeed provide the safety enhancements that we were hoping for. So I think with that, I need to thank the participants for your time and effort in preparing and during this session for answering the questions and the presentations. And I thank the audience for listening in and providing us with really good questions that we were able to answer partially today. So with that, I think thanks to all, and have a good long weekend for those of you that are not flying. Thank you.
Thank you.